Before the war, I had a name. The Munitorum traded it for a number and a stamp. They shaved my head and left me with 73319 pressed into tin and hung around my neck like a promise. I still try to remember the sound of my name in my sister's voice, but numbers are heavier than memory. Numbers catch on the lip and do not move. We were farmers after a fashion. Dust was our crop. In dry season, we sifted it through torn mesh to hunt for soil, coaxed a meager living out of cracked terraces near the hive's shadow. Machines higher up drank the real water. What reached us came as mist that tasted of rust and old pipes. Morning began with the churn of the grinders in the district refinery, industrial thunder rolling over stubble. We learned to tell time by pitch alone, high and whining near 6, thick and sullen near 9. A long trembling at midday that made cups creep toward table edges. I had flour on my hands when they came. The dust clung to sweat in my palms and turned the lines white. The collection truck rattled in with 2 enforcers in blue-black coats and a clerk under a sunshade, his ledger bound with brass claws. The drumbeat was thin, hollow. It made our half-collapsed sheds sound larger than they were. The clerk's voice was not loud, but he had a megaphone that turned scolding into law. By decree of the Departento Munitorum of His Most Divine Majesty, the Emperor of Mankind, he began. There were other words, bulked with tradition and hunger. We all know the tone. It's the tone the hive uses to say that your debt is older than you are. He asked for literacy. A few of us stepped forward. Me, because my mother had taught me letters with sales chits and old hymnals, and because stepping back never made a boot miss your toes, only hit with less warning. The clerk's pen moved like a knife. He did not write our names, only the tags of our hab block and district. Names were messy, ink was expensive. He handed me a form I did not read, and pointed where to sign. The red seal already waited at the corner, a wax flower with a skull pressed in. The stamp fell on the wax with a little thud, like a heart settling after a fright. When it lifted, my future was circular and official. The clerk smiled at the mark, not at me. They allowed us 15 minutes. I found my sister in the yard where the goats used to wander, before the refinery took them for filters. She had been grinding old grain, and there was flour on her face in a shape like a hand. She did not try to wipe it off. She gave me a wrapped crust and a tin icon of the emperor that had belonged to our mother. The icon had a nick where it had fallen once, years ago. The dent looked like a stern, crooked grin. "You'll be back for harvest," she said, and made it a question only by the breath she took after. "I'll be back," I said. Numbers do not know the seasons, but our mouths do. We made the sound of a promise and pretended it was more than air pushed between teeth. They took us, 12 from our stretch of road, 36 more from farther out, to the induction yard near the hive's lowest gate, where the city's belly belched its smoke hot and close. There, under a string of lights that flickered in unison when a larger machine coughed, we entered a new grammar. The barber squad shaved our heads with shears that nicked skin and left bright commas of blood on collars. The quartermaster hurled uniforms at us as if the cloth could bite and needed to be stunned. Mine hung from my shoulders like tired flags. Boots came by size approximation and prayer. "If it doesn't bleed, it fits," said the man with the measuring tape, and laughed at his own joke until enforcer eyes fell on him. My first lasgun felt wrong in my hands. The stock was scarred by someone else's history. The oil smelt like sermons, sharp, cleansing, astringent enough to make my eyes water. The charge pack looked like a thin black loaf. The sergeant slapped my wrist when I tried to check its weight. "You learn it by count, not by feel," he said. "You'll learn a lot by count." He was Sergeant Varon. His voice was a shovel through gravel, steady, ugly, honest. He taught with his own scars, a line across the cheek that tugged when he smiled, and a notch missing from his left ear. "Drink when you can, piss when told, breathe when I say," he told us the first hour. "You keep your barrel clean and your mouth closed. The Emperor hears a clean barrel better than a pretty prayer." He spat just left of my boot. I didn't shift my foot. I thought that was bravery, despite the shaking. The commissar arrived with a stillness like a storm about to decide where to break. His greatcoat fell perfectly. He wore the hat with the retribution bird like it was a coin pressed into his skull, and he didn't intend to spend it. We learned his name fast, because others said it often and carefully. Rot. He wasn't old. He had the kind of youth that looks as if it were cut from marble instead of born. He watched us the way a butcher watches a scale. We ran. We ran with masks on until breath became a negotiated resource, until words shrank into grunts and numbers. 5 more, 3 more, last one began to float through my head on their own. We learned to strip the lasgun blind, each screw and plate a prayer said in the fingertips. We learned that the oil stains never truly leave your hands. They only sink, a blessing or a curse you carry into sleep. We learned to canter in place under the weight of armor that was only almost the right shape for the bones beneath it. At the firing line, the smell changed from oil to ozone, a sweet metallic taste that felt like biting a battery. The beams smacked the targets and left little burnt blossoms where chest and head should be. Varon stalked behind us and tapped shoulders with a stick. "Think less about killing and more about not missing," he said. "Killing is a byproduct of attention. Missing is a choice." I missed twice and hit once. He grunted, which meant we were alive enough for him to bother. At night, the induction yard hummed like a hive kettle, each tent a bubble forming and bursting with breath and curse. That first night I met Mill. He was young enough to still have roundness in his cheeks under the stubble they missed. His eyes were the color of old puddles. He had a ribbon tied around his wrist, blue for luck or water, or the sky nobody had seen clean in generations. "Don't look toward the infirmary at night," he said into his blanket, like he was speaking to himself and I happened to be near enough to catch some words. "They stack the bags outside when they're full. They rock in the wind like children. If you look, you'll count. If you count, you'll start guessing. If you guess, you won't sleep. If you don't sleep," he made a small clicking sound with his tongue that meant, "then nothing good." "What's in the bags?" I asked, though I knew. "The things we won't be again," he said, softer. Then he pulled something from under his pillow, a bent nail with a hole drilled through, strung on a cord. My uncle said metal carries prayers faster. The machine spirits can hear the scrape. He held it out. "Touch it." I did. It was warm with his fear. The next day, they gave us our numbers, as if they had been waiting in a sealed crate, and we were simply picking up the correct issue. We lined up and spoke them aloud. 73319, I said, and felt the shape of it settle in my mouth like a new tooth that cut the tongue whenever I wasn't careful. Hrot paced in front, eyes ticking when anyone stumbled. "Your number is your name until your death earns you stone," he said. "Stone is expensive. Do not assume it." We laughed because no other sound was safe. They made an example before noon. A man from the second row, older than most, with a bald spot that had not needed the barber squad, bolted when the bugles sounded drill. He ran like he had planned it in the same part of the night where others planned kisses. 2 enforcers caught him by the arms. Hrot walked up as if strolling to a fountain. He did not raise his voice. "Article 27, he said to the air. "Cowardice under orders." He drew his pistol as if continuing a conversation and put a bolt through the man's temple. The sound was small in the open, a snap and sizzle. The air smelt like burned hair and fatty meat and the same ozone from the firing line. Varen made us watch past where the eyes stopped recognizing light. Then he made us police the brass, even though the weapon spent none. Practice makes a habit. That night I tried to pray. The words came out as lists. Bless the charge packs, numbered 1 to 3. Bless the rations, hard, softer when boiled. Bless the boots, size uncertain. Bless the lasgun, serial unknown. Bless the sister, remaining. Bless the goat shed, empty. Bless the flower that clings. I fell asleep with the taste of oil in my mouth and numbers in my head. I counted breaths because it was something I could finish. If there is mercy in war, it is only in small completions. 10, then 10, then 10, until dawn arrives, pretending to be a solution. On the 4th day, they herded us up the ramp of a troop transport whose name was painted in letters flaked to ghosts. The ship looked like a factory that had grown a spine. Inside, the air was stale and too warm, like breath trapped in a jar and reopened only for inspection. We hung in slings 3 levels high, each man's boots near another man's head, the smells of fear and polish and recycled broth layered like an onion that someone had chewed and put back together. The Geller field came up with a thrum that settled into the bones. It felt like standing too close to a bell when someone strikes it and learning that your ribs are instruments. Mill vomited and then apologized to the floor as if it would report him. Someone started a hymn, and someone else told him to shut up because the machine spirits were listening to more important burdens. It happened on the 2nd watch. The field sneezed. It is the only word that fits. There was a pressure change, like a lover leaving the bed and taking the blanket with them. The light went green for an instant. The wrong green, the kind spoiled meat wears when you lie to yourself about eating it anyway. My ears popped twice. The hum rose and twisted and came back wrong. In that spiral, I heard my mother call me by my name that I am not supposed to write anymore. I answered with my number because it was all I had to hand. That is how we bargain with the dark. We pay what we are given. 3 were taken away, 2 for screaming, 1 for not reacting at all. The screaming ones shouted in languages none of us knew and yet understood. 1 kept calling for someone named Jasa to get out of the oven, which had never existed for any of us. The silent one stared at the rivets and said the word clouds very slowly, over and over. And when they tried to move his eyes, they felt like marbles rolled against glass. The Medicae men in white coats had bags ready, the same shape as in the induction yard, the same rocking in the air when you walk past too quickly. Mill touched the nail under his shirt and said a broken prayer into the cord. The field steadied. The green left the lights as if ashamed of itself. No one sang after that. We learned the taste of our own breath under panic, and how long it takes for fear to thin into something workable. Varen moved through the slings, whispering that we were fine, that it happens sometimes, that the Emperor's light is a net you feel only when you almost slip out of it. His voice made practical promises. He told us where the extra water was and how not to blow a fuse trying to heat it. I wrote a letter I could not send. The Munitorum provided a paper that had boxes printed on it where boxes were needed: name, rank, number, unit, destination. I filled what I knew. 73319, I wrote, and 117th Ardiam, because we'd been told where we were bound. Under name, there was a moment where my hand paused. I put down the letter A and then stopped. It looked like an insect on a white wall. I crossed it out with care until the paper was clean again inside the scar. Sister, I wrote instead, and put the tin icon beside the sheet to keep me honest while I scratched lines with a dull stylus. I told her about the induction yard and the way Hrot's pistol made the air smell. I told her about the nail around Mill's neck that he believes makes the machine gods listen faster. I told her I was eating and sleeping as allowed, and that the skin on my heels had not bled through the socks, which was almost true. I told her not to look for me at the old fence on feast day, because I would not be there, not for a while, and that I had taken the small bone-handled knife from our kitchen because a man needs an old thing when the new things begin to define him. I did not tell her about the field sneezing and the green light and what it had done to my name. I did not write about how numbers are easy to clean off your tongue when someone else is bleeding, and how hard it is to wash away a word spoken by someone you loved when a machine makes a mistake in the air. I folded the paper along the line it asked me to, and I did not know where to put it. The slot-marked post was nailed shut. Varen said the address would come later, possibly. He said it like a man with a spare piece of bread he intends to share and cannot be sure he will not eat first. Nights on the transport were long, not because time stretched, but because the thrum of the field set a cadence in the chest that disagreed with my old counting. I tried to synchronize. 10 breaths to the minor tremor, 10 to the heavy. Sometimes I aligned, sometimes I drifted, and saw the induction yard from a height as if the ship had already lifted, then I had never left the ground. Dreams were not dreams. They were inventories of the day, written in a shaking hand. Oil, present. Ozone, present. Bread, not enough. Water, counted. Fear, quantities vary. Courage, issued at need by Varen. Return unused portions to armorer by dusk. Once, passing along the ladders to fetch a can of something that promised to be soup if heated, I caught sight of the stenciled words on a bulkhead, scrubbed almost invisible by time and salt hands. Throne, take us safe. Throne, take us whole. Someone had scratched under it, smaller, take us quick. I put my palm on the metal and it hummed back a little. It felt like a throat with a cough trapped in it. Mill asked me, "Do you think the Emperor knows my number?" "I think he knows the ledger better than the clerk," I said. It came out cruel and true. He nodded like a boy given the worst of two medicines and choosing at last to swallow. The closer we drew to Ardiam, the more the ship smelled of anticipation, of polish used twice when once would have done, of bodies cleaned because there is a dignity in going to a bad place with a clean neck. Varen had us reassemble our kit again and again until the metal bits clicked like teeth chattering in cold. Hrot inspected us with the expression of a man examining a purchase and being satisfied, not delighted. Satisfaction is all the mercy you get from such men. Rumors arrived before we did, as rumors will. The planet was dry, said one. The planet was wet with rot, said another. The enemies were men like us, only greener, said a third. An old guardsman with a face like knotted rope told us you could plant a flag in the soil of Ardiam and the ground would not accept the pole unless you fed it blood first. He laughed and coughed until something ugly came up and he swallowed it again. So don't plant flags, he said. March and do not claim. Varen gathered us and spoke plain. You will do as told, he said. You will drink water when water is there and hope is not. You will fire when I say. You will keep your head in your helmet and your mind in your mouth. You will not look at the bags. You will not look at the sky for too long, or you will start to see things that want you to keep looking. You will trust your number because it is near your heart, and not your name, because names wander off when frightened. You will come back when I tell you to. What if we cannot? Someone asked. Then you will send word by someone who can, Varen said. He looked at me for a heartbeat, and then looked past. I did not know what he had seen, or chosen not to. We broke atmosphere in a dance of alarms. The ship shook like a beast worried by a larger beast. My stomach leapt and fell and leapt again, trying to outrun the rest of me. The thrumming of the field shifted. The hum of the engines deepened. The coil in my chest that had been wound since the stamp fell pressed harder inward and then clicked one tooth farther along. I held the tin icon in my fist and felt the dent with my thumb. Somewhere in the belly of the ship, men prayed to litanies they knew by heart, to sanctified oil, to well-seated cartridges, to doors that open and close in the right order, to clamps that release on cue, to straps that do not break. Machine spirits are practical gods. They prefer offerings they can count. Mill leaned toward me. What's Ardiam like? Dust, I said. They say it doesn't drink rain, it drinks blood.
He nodded, because there are some lies you can't tell even to calm a friend. When the landing klaxons howled, Hrot walked the aisle and looked into each face as if counting coins into a purse. Varen met us by the bay door, his missing ear catching shadows. "Remember your numbers," he said. "Remember the man next to you is counting on you to count. Remember to breathe when you can and to stop when you can't. The rest is paperwork." He grinned. The scar on his cheek pulled his mouth a degree toward patience. The door opened. Light the color of old bones spilled in and turned every edge mean. The air tasted of overheating metal and a spice I had no word for, like meat seasoned with rust. The ramp extended with a judder that rattled teeth. The world waited beyond, flat and uninvited. My number was cold against my skin. I put my hand to it as if to pin it through. Behind my eyelids, the clerk's stamp fell again and again, a wax-red sun smacked by a small iron god. Every thud said the same thing in different words. You have been chosen because the choosing is not about you. We stepped forward into the dust of the trenches that had not yet learned our names.
They gave us numbers before they gave us faith. Mine was 73319, stamped on tin, pressed sharp against the chest whenever the strap pulled wrong. The sergeant told us to repeat it until we could hear it even in dreams. "When you are parts, the machine runs," he said. "When you are names, you are noise." We lined up under lamps that swung with the wind and spoke the digits aloud, one after another, until the air was full of broken rhythm. A man stumbled and said his old name first. Commissar Hrot lifted his chin, like a hunter who smells a wound. The man corrected himself, but the silence that followed was heavy enough to choke on. Later, we found his bunk empty. No one asked. The bags outside infirmaries always explained what voices refused. Days blurred into lessons that hurt. Strip, clean, reassemble, march, halt, dig. Drink only at signal, eat only when told. We learned how much sand a boot can hold and still pretend to be useful. We learned the weight of a full charge pack and how it sags after the 5th volley. We learned to sleep in armor because skin can rest, but metal cannot. And the commissar valued what could not rest. I learned to count differently. Before, counting meant sacks of grain, buckets of water, debts tallied at market. Now it meant the 10 strokes of a rag down the lasgun barrel, the 30 paces between cover, the 3 seconds you had to drop when a shell whistled overhead. Counting was survival, and survival was a form of prayer. Mill stayed beside me most evenings. His nail on a cord clicked softly when he rubbed it, a nervous tick that made a rhythm of fear. He whispered stories, half invented, half overheard. The enemy, he said, carried knives filled with sickness. They cut once, and the wound grew mouths. Others swore the traitors bled clean water, so the earth drank them happily. Laughter followed these tales, but it was thin, like cloth stretched too far. We dug trenches under Varen's eye. Dust became mud when sweat fell in, then dried to dust again by noon.
The walls caved easy, and we learned to stack sandbags with prayer seals pressed into the fabric. They said the words printed there made the dirt more loyal. I doubted dirt could read, but we stacked them anyway. Nights were the worst. The dark was not dark. It was layered with sounds, scratches of rats large enough to club, the hiss of wind through broken vents, the mutters of men who dreamed aloud. Sometimes the trenches filled with whispers not born of mouths. When the Gellar field had sneezed on the ship, it left a sickness in my ears, and sometimes I thought I still heard it, voices stretching like cloth tearing. I told no one. Fear was punishable.
Lena, the field medic, taught us strange things. If no bandage, she said, use ash. If no ash, use dirt and a verse. The body will take offense and clot out of spite. Her hands were always red, not from paint, but from tasks that never washed clean. She smiled rarely, but when she did, it looked like she was remembering someone else's joke. We carried our first bodies in the second week. Not ours, civilians caught between lines. Children with green sores bloomed on their arms, eyes glassy as marbles. Orders said not to let them through. They pressed at the barricade, calling names we didn't answer to. Mill turned his head and muttered a prayer. I stared until Sergeant Varon barked, eyes front. Later, when I tried to sleep, their faces pushed through the sand of my dreams. The first artillery came from our own side. Basilisks set behind us roared, and the shells fell short. Dirt and steel rained into the trench. Men choked, ears rang. We lay face down, teeth full of grit, while Varon shouted, "Don't scream. Screaming marks you." I bit my tongue to keep silent and tasted iron that wasn't from the enemy. The day I first killed someone was bright, too bright. Patrol brought us near a drainage ditch. From the weeds rose shapes, men in patchwork armor, masks sewn with bells. They stank of rot and cheap incense. My lasgun snapped to shoulder the way training demanded. I fired because not firing would have left me with more thoughts. The beam carved his face open like a door. I saw inside a stranger's skull before he fell. I had expected triumph. Instead, there was a weight, as if numbers had piled on my chest. I did not know his name, only that now he would never say it again. Varon clapped my shoulder and said, "Good, don't think. Thinking wastes charge." I nodded. My hands shook anyway. That night, I wrote another letter I could not send. "Sister," I scratched. "Today I saw inside a man. I am afraid I will see him again when I close my eyes." I tore it up before Mill could notice. He was humming under his breath, a hymn twisted into a lullaby. Commissar Hrott gave us a sermon the next morning. "Fear is treachery dressed as humility," he said. "The Emperor has no use for humility, only obedience." His pistol rested on the podium, as casual as bread on a table. We listened because silence was survival. When my shift came on the nightline, I counted breaths again. 10, then 10, then 10. The stars above were thin pinpricks. They did not look holy. They looked hungry. The attack came 2 nights later. Flares tore the sky into strips of red and white. The traitors poured down the slope, screaming through broken masks, bells clanging like sick prayers. Our lasguns answered in a chorus of light. The trench filled with the smell of cooked air and sweat. Mill stood beside me, firing with his offhand, because his right wrist was swollen from training. A shell burst nearby. He screamed, dropped, and when I dragged him clear, I saw what was left of his hand. Not much, just blood and a ragged edge. He begged me not to let go. I wrapped his arm in torn cloth and hauled him behind the line while shells kept falling. I don't remember firing. I remember his weight, heavier with every step. Varen's voice cut through the chaos, telling me to move, to keep moving. Mill lived. The Medicae took what was left of him and returned something quieter. He looked at me with fever eyes and whispered, "I'll ask for rear duty. Carry crates, not guns. Maybe they'll let me." I nodded, though I knew hope was rationed thinner than water. That night, the trench was silent. No jokes, no songs, no whispered prayers. Just the drip of water from cracked pipes and the rasp of men cleaning weapons they had already cleaned. I held the tin icon from my sister and pressed the dent into my thumb until it hurt. The war had only just begun for us, but I already felt carved thinner, like bread sliced too many times for too many mouths. We were learning not to die. That was the lesson. Surviving was not victory. Surviving was simply the absence of permission to fall. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man's face split open by my lasgun, and Mill's hand lying somewhere in the dirt. And I wondered which of us had been luckier. Ardiam had a season they called the Rains. Nothing fell. The sky just lowered until the color of it pressed on your teeth and made everything taste like old copper. Pipes sweated. Men sweated. The trenches clung to our calves as if the ground had learned envy. Dust rose and sat back down in the same breath. It was not weather so much as a mood the planet put on and refused to remove. Varen said it was good for the lungs because it kept us from trusting them. We held a line that curved around Refinery 9, a collection of towers that looked like teeth grown too long for a jaw. The stacks wheezed greenish steam that drifted and never rained but always promised to. The map said the position was a salient. We learned that a salient is a fancy word for a place enemies agree looks delicious. I counted the new alphabet of survival Varen taught us and called it scripture because it worked. Drink when you can, because you won't when you must. Piss when told, or your body will hold grudges. Sleep in armor, or you will sleep in a bag. Keep your barrel clean. Keep your thoughts out of it. When the flares go up, do not look at them. When the bells start, do not count them. When the bells won't stop, count breaths instead. 10, then 10, then 10. The rains, not rains, got into everything. Boots sealed to socks. Lena warned us never to peel footwear off completely once the shift began. If you take them off, she said, your feet will remember they are flesh and swell with spite. You will never put the boots back on, and then you belong to me, not to the line. Her hands stayed red. She washed in water darker than wine and called it clean because there was no other word available. We met the first refugees that week. A column of shadows shuffled along the berm, clutching each other, faces studded with sores the color of pond moss. Children tugged at our barricade the way goats used to tug at gate latches. "Please," said a man whose mouth had collapsed on one side into a grin it hadn't chosen. "We are from the workers' district. The priests pricked us with needles and said our blood would turn polite if we let it." The order came along the trench before the sentence ended. Do not admit. Quarantine isn't charity with a clever hat, it is just a harder word for no. We stood and did not move. They stood and did not move. Someone behind them rang a tiny bell once, and the sound went through me like a nail pushed into wood from the wrong side. Varen said, "Eyes front." We looked at the horizon because it was the only direction that did not ask anything from us. That night, the sky glittered with flares and insects. The insects were not insects. They were the size of small fists and wore their wings like parchment scribbled on with bad script. A priest of rot crawled into the forward trench at dawn like a sermon that had lost its pulpit. He carried a jar of flies crammed so tight the glass fogged with their breath. He offered the jar to us and called it a gift. Harat didn't aim. He just watched as the flamers coughed. The priest burned as if he had been soaking in oil. We watched because not to watch is to dream later, and dreams are not merciful. The jar broke and the flies burned, popping like fat in a pan. The smell hung low and sweet and wrong. Lena passed rags soaked in alcohol. "Press them to your face," she said. "Pretend you are somewhere else." Mill left us that same day. He came from the Medicae station with his hand bound in fresh linen and a paper that said reassignment in letters that believed themselves. His eyes were fever-glossed and grateful. "Back area lifting detail," he whispered, as if he were confessing a sin and wanted forgiveness in exchange for the pleasure of saying it aloud. He took hold of my sleeve with his good hand. "Don't die while I'm not there to pull you out by the collar." I told him I would wait, because lies among friends are softer than truths, and softer is necessary. Hrot made a point of collecting our letters that evening. He stood on a crate and held a sack open. "Communications are a privilege," he announced. "Privileges rot discipline if left damp." He read the top of each page before shoving it down. Anything too wet with feeling, he tore neatly and let the pieces ride the wind. I watched my own words go down whole because they were dry enough to pass. I had learned to write in lists. Boots, serviceable. Food, sufficient. Health, adequate. Faith, present. He nodded as if I had tithed correctly. We received a Vox set the next morning, 2 men to carry it. The operator, a little older than the rest, with a head shaped for headphones, and a boy to keep the batteries like he was babysitting fire. The unit hummed as if bees had been taught language and were trying to apologize for it. Varin patted the metal frame with the back of his knuckles, the way you test melons at market. "Now we can speak more precisely," he said. "The sky will know our names." We laughed without laughter. The rains not rains thickened. The pipes in the refinery sang faint notes when the wind came from the west, and the notes did not repeat often enough to be called a song. Rats learned our schedule and took their meals from our laps when we were too slow to slap them away. Men began to carry small tokens openly: nails, screws, bits of ribbon, keys to doors that no longer existed. You could tell the ones who had gone too long without sleep by the way they stared at their lucky thing as if it were explaining God to them, and failing. 2 nights later, the Vox taught me a word for grief that was only numbers. We were stretched thin along a cut called Goose Gutter because some wit had found humor there. The batteries hissed where they sat under canvas. The operator, Jas or Joss or something like that, names slid off in weather like this, kept leaning his head toward the speaker as if the sound would enter him faster that way. He said, "Repeat," and "say again," and "confirm grid," and then a shell reached for us with a hand of light. The blast folded air into a fist and pressed it through all of us. When I opened my eyes, my mouth was full of dust and a tooth I didn't recognize. Jas lay half on the Vox, half off. The top of his head looked like a cap pulled back too far. He made a sound that would have been a word if it had remembered how to begin. The boy with the batteries was a red smear with a hand protruding, as if prepared to shake. I did not choose. I put the headset on because my hands needed to be doing something other than counting what was broken. The hum entered my skull and learned the number of my bones. Voices came through, clean as paper tearing. Grid Bravo 6, enemy at culvert line. Say your heat. Heat meant how many rifles yet stood. I counted wrong twice and corrected. The other end said, "Hold. Artillery is yours. Mark with smoke and don't breathe it." Varin looked at me. His cheek scar twitched in a smile that wasn't one. "That you, number?" 73319, I said. I did not say my name. "I have the Vox." "Then you have the sky," he said. "Make it useful." The artillerist sounded drunk. The line whooped and then turned serious in the space between breaths. Splash in 30, splash in 10. I marked smoke and watched it drift without rain. Shells stitched the culvert, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. The ground lifted its skirt and tried to run. Bodies, ours and theirs, remembered gravity imperfectly, and then remembered it better. A piece of mask spun and settled near my boot like a coin deciding which side to be. I felt a wetness on my ear and touched it and found someone else's hair tangled in my fingers. We held. Holding is not a victory. It is just what you say when the enemy did not take your place and you did not take theirs, and the ground stayed undecided about who it belongs to. After, we lay in the trench and breathed like animals that had forgotten language. Krot walked along the line and looked down at us. He did not speak. He didn't need to. His silence said the same thing every time. Your fear is noticed. Do not let it be seen.
I kept the headset because no one told me to take it off. The strap smelled of oil and someone else's scalp. The weight of the set on my shoulders made me stand a fraction straighter. the way carrying tools always had at home. But this tool listened back. It whispered things I should not have heard. Distant units miscounting, officers making plans that smelled of ignorance, a man weeping into his chest piece and thinking the channel was closed. Sometimes the Vox whispered in voices I did not believe were connected to men. The rains, not rains, carried sound oddly, and the refinery pipes gave back echoes, and the field we could not see hummed its altar tone. Once, very late, I heard my mother again, calling me by the letter I no longer dared write. I lifted the set away from my head and placed it on the parapet and watched it there for a long time. In the morning, Varan said nothing, just put it back where it belonged and tightened the strap across my chest. Hrot intensified inspections. He had heard rumors of letters that mentioned hunger without discipline, thirst without gratitude. He gathered us and spoke about the beauty of scarcity. A rationed man is a focused man, he said. Waste is betrayal. Self-pity is a pollutant. He wore his hat as if born with it. I wondered what his number was and if anyone had ever spoken it to him in the dark. We went out on a canister run 3 nights after I took the Vox. Fuel drums waited behind a collapsed machine shed that had once eaten ore and now fed only rats. The route there ran along a drainage channel clogged with silt that never dried because there had never been rain to dry it. The enemy had been quiet for 2 days, which meant they were learning to make new noises. We slid along the embankment, 5 of us and a cart. Mill was not with us. The thought came and went like a moth. Lena came because she believed in staying near where people were most likely to complicate her job by bleeding. Halfway out, bells began. 1, 2, 4, 7, then a clatter that made numbers meaningless. Varan hissed us flat. In the culvert ahead, shapes slouched into being. Masks stitched and stained. Needles cradled like candles in a procession. A man with a swollen belly banged a gong with his own forearm, bone showing white through torn meat. He smiled at us as if offering a seat at his table. I said grids into the Vox with a mouth that refused to admit it was mine. Guns are elsewhere, came the answer. Hold if you can. If you can't, pretend. We pretended long enough for the enemy to believe us. We fired in rhythm and then broke rhythm and then found it again. The cart took a round and squealed like a horse. Lena dragged a man twice her weight by the collar and snarled at me for looking. Look later, she said. Now count. I counted breaths again and shot between them, because that's when the barrel is still. 10, then 10, then 10. We returned with fewer bodies than we took out. Hrot met us at the lip of the trench and nodded as if numbers had behaved. Losses acceptable, he said. I wanted to ask, acceptable to whom? I didn't. The question would have spent a charge pack and hit nothing. The letters that week came back to us with stamps that said undeliverable in 3 languages. The Munitorum had decided the postal route was not cost-efficient under current conditions. I read my own words again, dry, list-like, careful,
and folded them smaller and smaller until they made a little block that did not unfold easily. I put it under my tongue and held it there until the paper began to soften, and then I took it out and dried it on the inside of my helmet like a sin I did not intend to give up.
In the middle of the week, a rumor ran the trench like a rat. There would be a purge of the refinery's lower halls. Sanitary measures, said a man with a clerk's voice and a rifle he did not know how to hold. He wore a ribbon of authority pinned to his breast with the wrong pin. Varen said nothing. Lena stared at nothing until it stared back. Hrot polished the bolt pistol and watched us in its reflection. Before that order ripened, the enemy pushed again near the drainage shaft that fed Goose Gutter. The shaft had iron rungs, slick with something that might have been water in another life. We were sent to hold the mouth, while repairs were planned by men far from mouths and plans. The vox buzzed like a promise. Hold, it said. Hold, it kept saying, as if the saying were enough to make the thing happen. The first wave came low, stumbling, as if they had forgotten how knees worked. The second came high, yelling, as if they had remembered knees too well and wanted to show them off. We fired until barrels hissed. I called for shells until the guns grew bored of my voice. Pieces of the refinery fell around us in flakes like burnt pastry. The sky pressed down until my thoughts fell flatter between my ears. The operator's chair stood empty beside me, and I realized I had not thought of Jas since the day his head came undone. I felt something then, a small, sharp guilt, like a needle lodged under a thumbnail. I pushed it down with the weight of the headset and told myself that memory is a bag, and bags are for the infirmary, and I did not rock. When the attack finally broke, it did not look like breaking. It looked like men discovering limits and disliking the discovery. They fell back as if reluctantly leaving a party that had run out of food. We stood up in the trench, all of us taller by an inch of disbelief that we still were. Varen nodded once. Hrot did not nod. Lena sat and took her gloves off and looked at her hands as if deciding whether to keep them. I gave the sky back its weight and took my own. My number hung cold and slick on my chest, stamped tin with edges that had begun to smooth only a little from constant touch. I traced the digits and found them still sharp enough to mark skin if I pressed. 73319. I mouthed them once, then twice, then did not, because the sound of them had begun to feel like asking forgiveness from a door. That night sleep did not come. The not rain season drummed its quiet on the pipes. In the Vox, somewhere far away, someone laughed too long at something not funny. I took the headset off again and set it on the parapet where the flies had burned days ago, and I watched the refinery exhale and inhale, a giant with bad lungs teaching itself to breathe. 5. In the morning, Varen handed me the set without comment. Alphabet, he said. Drink, piss, sleep, clean. Don't look, don't count bells, count breaths, I recited. Good, he said. Add one more. Listen when you must.
Put it down when you mustn't. I nodded. I put it on. I wondered how many words could live inside a single machine, and how many machines could live inside a man, and which of us would break first. Mill returned once, for an hour, with a crate on his shoulder and a grin he pretended wasn't a wince. He looked thinner and cleaner. He pressed his good hand to the top of my helmet, as if checking a child for fever. "Still here," he said. "Still counting," I said. "Don't stop," he said. And then he was gone, back along the service track, small under towers that did not rain. By the end of the season that wasn't, the trench had taken its shape from us and we from it. The walls bore the shine of our shoulders. The floor knew where our heels preferred. The parapet curved where elbows leaned during the long gray pauses between small disasters. Men slept in grooves their bodies had carved, as if the planet were a bed remembering them. The refinery wheezed. The bells came and went. The flies were fewer, or we noticed them less. I learned that hope is not a shining thing. It is a habit. You put on the headset because you did yesterday. You clean the barrel because it will bite if dirty. You drink because Varen's voice said so, and if Varen's voice stops, you will still lift the canteen because your hands remember a world where it mattered too. You write letters even when the bag is closed. You count breaths where bells would like to live. When the order came down for a sanitary action in the lower halls of Refinery 9, I kept the Vox close and listened to the sky mispronounce the names of rooms men were about to burn. I pressed my number until it hurt. I felt the dent in my sister's icon with my thumb and tried to recall the taste of flour that clings to sweat. The planet tightened its mood another notch. The not rain pressed. We waited with clean barrels and dry words. We were learning something that was not dying and not living either. A season of holding still while the world around us practiced being a grave and a birthplace at the same time. The map called our line a salient. The men called it home, because we had lost the right to call anywhere else that. And still the sky did not rain. It only promised to, the way letters promised to leave, and never did.
The order came down like all orders do, on paper that smelled of oil and mold, carried by a clerk whose eyes had learned to avoid ours. Sanitary action, Refinery 9, lower halls. The words looked harmless in ink. Out loud, they tasted like ash. We knew what sanitary meant now. It meant that someone, somewhere, decided bodies were cheaper than bandages. It meant the Emperor's mercy was expressed through fire, because fire did not argue. Sergeant Varen gathered us in the trench and read it aloud once, then folded it neat, tucked it into his vest, and spat. "We go," he said. He did not tell us why. We did not ask. Asking was another word for refusing, and refusing was already answered by Commissar Hrott's pistol. We entered the refinery at dawn, when the false rain clung heaviest to skin. The lower halls were warm like breath. The air carried rust, oil, and something underneath. Sweet, spoiled, unmistakably human. Light came through broken panels, green-tinged, as if we were walking underwater. Shapes moved in the shadows, survivors. Men and women who had worked the machines, their faces thin and eyes wide with a hunger that had stopped asking for food. Some raised their hands. Some clutched scraps of metal sharpened to points. Some carried children swaddled in cloth, already spotted with lesions. "Orders?" I whispered into the vox. My throat felt like it belonged to someone else. "Purge," came the reply. "Contamination confirmed." One woman stepped forward. She was thin as a wire, her cheeks hollowed, but in her eyes there was something stubborn, something I almost recognized from my sister. She held up a little tin icon of the Emperor, dented on one side. My breath caught. It was the same shape, the same crooked grin. For a heartbeat, I thought it was the one I carried, stolen from me by some cruel joke of time. My hand trembled on the trigger. She lifted the icon higher, as if appeal to faith could bend a rifle's barrel. Behind her, a boy clung to her leg. His sores wept yellow. His mouth shaped a word that might have been water. "Do it," Hot said behind me. His voice was calm, precise, the kind of calm that comes from knowing what will happen before it happens. Sanitary means empty. Varen's voice cut across, low but firm. "On me, we burn." The flamers coughed. Fire rolled forward in a sheet, swallowing the air. Screams filled the hall, high and sharp, until they weren't screams anymore, just noise too big for a throat. The woman's icon glowed white, then black, then nothing. The boy's hand clawed at the light until it became part of it. I fired into the flames because it was easier to shoot at light than at faces. My shots were unnecessary. The fire needed no help, but my finger kept pulling because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering. When it ended, the hall smelled of boiled meat and metal. The walls dripped. Ash stuck to my teeth. Lena pressed a rag to my mouth and nose. "Breathe through this," she said. Her hands were shaking. For once, they looked human instead of iron. We moved room to room, repeating the action. Each time it grew easier to raise the weapon and harder to lower it after. I began to understand what Hrut meant when he said fear was treachery. It wasn't that fear made you run. It was that fear made you human, and humanity got in the way of fire. Afterwards, the refinery was quiet, too quiet. The silence pressed against my ears, louder than any shell. It felt like we had erased something bigger than voices. That night, I sat with my lasgun across my knees and cleaned it until the metal gleamed. I rubbed until my fingers ached, as if polish could scrape away what my eyes still carried. I tried to pray, but the words stuck halfway, like bread choking a throat too dry. The lists I used to write came back instead. Boots, intact. Water, rationed. Faith, absent. Number, 73319. Lena sat near me, binding her own hands where the rag had burned them. "You did what you were told," she said. "Does that help?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes looked far away, past the trench, past the towers, somewhere no map marked. "Doing pain is not the same as loving it," she said finally.
don't confuse them.
Varen distributed red thread patches the next morning. Commended for zeal, the Munitorum paper said. Zeal, what a word for pressing fire into children's faces. We sewed the patches on because not sewing was another way of dying. Men joked dryly about the color matching the stains on our sleeves. The laughter cracked and fell apart like cheap glass. Commissar Hrot stood before us, pistol at his hip, gaze sharp. "The Emperor is proud," he said. "Your faith is proven. The weak burn away so the strong may endure." His words were flat, as if he had said them too many times to mean them anymore. Or maybe meaning was never part of it. That night I tried again to pray. No words came. The silence in my chest matched the silence of the refinery. My lips moved, but nothing filled the air. I wondered if the Emperor could hear silence. I wondered if silence was what he wanted from us all along. In the trench, Mill's bunk was still empty. I thought of his crooked smile, of the nail on his cord. Would he still call me friend if he saw what I had done? Or would he just nod, the way we all nodded now? Because nodding is easier than breaking. The refinery towers still exhaled steam, slow and heavy, like old lungs. But now they exhaled through us too. We were part of their machinery, just more fuel. When dawn came, orders arrived again. Not rest, not reprieve. Just new coordinates and another sheet of paper stamped with a skull. We had been marked as reliable. Reliable meant expendable in bigger tasks. I pressed my number tag against my chest until it hurt. 73319. Still Shark, still mine. Names were gone. Prayers were gone, but numbers remained. Numbers never cared what was burned to keep them counting. The storm came without rain. It came as a pressure in the teeth and a change in the color of light, a bruise yellow that made steel look tired and skin look borrowed. The refinery pipes vibrated, a single long note that set the trench boards humming. Vox channels crackled to salt. Aircraft stayed on their leashes and sulked in hangars. Electrical interference, someone said. Warp weather, said someone else. Varen shrugged. Either way, no angels, he said. Only us. The enemy had better timing than piety. They chose the first hour of the first day the sky forgot us. Bells began down the slope. 1, 2, a scatter like thrown nails. Masks appeared in the dip near Goose Gutter, stitched and stained, eyes shining with the kind of joy that belongs only to the mad and the cruel. They came in waves that did not break, only reshape. Needles glinted in their hands like little flagpoles for a nation that believed infection was a kind of citizenship. We were thin. The map had said salient. It had not said how many bones would be used to draw it. Ammunition crates arrived stamped for one caliber and filled with another. Grenades came without fuses, fuses without pins, pins without trust.
A runner brought the wrong Vox codes, and we spent 10 minutes saying the right words to the wrong ears. Lena moved along the line with her sleeves rolled, telling men to breathe between shots, as if there were breath to spare. The first push we handled with habit. Fire, duck, count, fire. The second found the soft piece in the middle of us and pressed. A shell came tight and low and folded Varen like paper at the knee. He sat, surprised. The leg had become a red theory below the thigh and did not argue long. Up, he told it, and when it refused, he laughed once and swore like a man losing a bet to a friend. 2 men dragged him toward the reserve trench. He tried to issue orders and kept running out of words. Hrot took the lip of the line like a man finally handed the job he had always dressed for. Vox, he said. I looked up with the headset tight against my skull. The strap had begun to bite a permanent groove above my ear. Here. Here. Artillery to grid Bravo 6-2, danger close, he said. We hold this. We hold it or we hold nothing. The guns farther back had the calm of old drunks. Wind is wrong, they said. Power flickers. I could hear the waver in their voices, the ship bell hum of the storm walking through their machines. Danger close, not recommended. Recommend it to the dead, Hrot said. Walk it in. I gave them meters I didn't quite believe, and then I believed them because belief was faster than accuracy. The first shells fell long and chewed up dead ground where nothing was dying yet. The second came shorter, and I felt the earth inhale through the soles of my feet. Dirt hit our helmets like thrown pans. A sandbag burst and poured its guts over my shoulder. A man 3 slots down did not get up, and I did not look long enough to turn him into a face I would have to keep. Closer, Hrot said. His voice did not rise. It never needed to. Closer, I repeated. I found myself counting not breaths this time, but seconds, the slow arithmetic of doom. You learn the difference between a shell that loves you and a shell that has no opinion about you at all. We were courting the latter.
They came again, masks and needles and bells and the stink of sweet wrongness. The artillery found the place we needed it to find, the line in their bodies where momentum decides to change sides. They broke there in a stutter, and we filled the stutter with light. The storm took the smoke and laid it down on us like a blanket that comforted nothing. A figure appeared on the trench ladder to my left with a crate on his shoulder and a grin too wide for a day like this. "Special delivery," he said, and I knew the voice before my head turned. Mill, thinner, cleaner, the blue ribbon still tied around his wrist like a promise that had survived longer than it should. The sleeve where his hand had once been was pinned and neat. His good hand held the crate. His eyes found me, and he laughed, a sound that skidded and did not land. "Still here. Still counting," I said. I reached to take the crate. He let me, then looked over my shoulder at the slope. The next wave was larger. They had brought a makeshift shield, a door ripped from a hab and painted with a god's diseased smile. The door bobbed toward us on knees and curses. A man behind it banged a gong with bone. Mill froze. He swallowed, and his throat clicked. I shouldn't be here, he said, too loud. I'm lifting detail. I'm not... His breath hitched. I can't. Hrot turned. The pistol appeared in his hand, as if his fingers had been built with it attached. Article 27, he said, almost bored. He had a gift for making murder sound like a footnote. Mill stepped back onto the ladder rungs without meaning to. The crate slid. A bandolier of charges tumbled and fell into the muck like black fish. He put his good hand up, palm forward, as if the gesture were a word. It was a child's word, old and useless. I moved before I thought. I put myself between the pistol and Mill. The barrel looked clean enough to say its prayers back to you. He saved me, I said. My voice was not a shout. It was something smaller, like a tool you use because your hand knows it better than your mind does. Second week, he bled out of his wrist and still pulled me. He's not a coward. He's a porter with one hand who forgot where he was for a breath. That's not an article. That's a man. Hrot did not blink. He lifted the pistol a fraction, as if to adjust for my skull. The storm hummed. Bells rolled down the slope again, louder now, counting wrong on purpose. Down, Varen croaked from somewhere behind us, the word barely a word. Whether he meant me or all of us, or the sun, I don't know.
The trench wall to our right exploded into a hole the size of a cart. Boards flew like a flock of ugly birds. Through the new mouth, the enemy poured. The door with the painted god wedged and toppled, trapping two of its carriers. Needles flashed. The sound in the trench rose to that pitch where all sounds agree to become one, the register of panic. Hrot did not fire at me. He turned the pistol past my ear and stitched 3 shots into the first mask. It snapped back and the bells tangled in its straps. "Gun," he said. "Gun, now." A heavy weapon sat 2 steps down, mounted on a pintle that would have looked at home on an altar. The loader lay folded over it like a false offering. The belt fed into mud. My body found its way, my hands remembered work. I slapped the feed straight with my palm, racked the charging handle, and the machine found its voice. A stuttering sermon that spoke only one word very fast. Mill slid against the sled opposite me. He hooked the belt across his shoulder and chest and fed it with his good hand, using the notch of his wrist like a thumb. His teeth bared in a grin that was only different from a sob by the angle. "Don't stop," he said. "I can do this. Don't stop." We did not stop. The gun bucked like a thing that wanted to be free of us. Tracer lines wrote rude words into the air. The painted door shattered, or seemed to realize it had been painted to fail, and sagged. Men behind it tried to wedge themselves into soil that did not want them. The muzzle smoked and then hissed. The smell of cooked metal cut through the sweet rot like honesty cuts through comfort. Hrot stood above and left, firing single, precise, disdainful shots at anything that looked like the future. The storm made the world very close. Heat built under my arms. My number tag stuck to my skin and printed its digits in sweat. 73319. I felt each character like the teeth of a gear engaging and trying not to strip.
A needle found Mill. It entered where the collar of his flak met the stubborn curve of his neck. It was not a dramatic wound. It did not throw him. It simply arrived. He flinched, then blinked, then fed the belt with a little shake as if the link had snagged. "Keep going," he said. His voice sounded far away and polite, like a man apologizing for leaving a table before dessert. He kept the belt moving. He had to use his teeth once to pull a stubborn clasp into line. A ribbon unwrapped from his wrist and fell, blue against mud. He did not notice. He swallowed, and I heard the click again, then another, as if the machine inside him had learned a new rhythm. "Mill," I said. "After," he said, very calmly. He fed the belt beautifully. I wished I had told him that earlier, when praise cost less. The enemy reached the lip and tried to pour over. The gun was the lip. We kept it so. Shells, ours, came again without warning, short enough to make the air grab us by the shirt. Someone screamed that we were being killed by friends, and someone else screamed that at least friends might stop. The gun stuttered. The belt ran out. I reached for another, and Mill's hand, his one, found it first. He laughed or retched. The sounds are neighbors. He pressed it into the feed, and his fingers slipped. I covered his wrist with my palm and felt a fever there like a forge breath.
The wave broke. Not all at once, not heroically. It broke because men found out that dying here would not be different enough from dying there to justify another step. They fell back politely, bells complaining. A few moved wrong, and Hot corrected them by removing their intentions at the head. The trench smelled like soup that had gone off a week ago and been reheated to pretend. I looked at Mill. He had stopped feeding the belt because it no longer needed to move. His eyes were half closed, which looked like rest until you saw what rest had decided to do to him. The needle had found a quick road. His mouth tried to form a word. It might have been my name before numbers. It might have been water. It might have been nothing. The blue ribbon lay in mud, a small sky that had dropped its end. "Hey," I said. I touched his cheek. He blinked once, twice, then let his head rest against the mount. He did not drop like men drop in stories. He arrived at stillness as if early for an appointment and content to wait. I pressed his nail charm into his palm and closed his fingers. It clicked once against the metal and sounded satisfied. Hot lowered the pistol. He looked at me and then past me, at the hole in the trench wall, at the door with the painted grin cracked in two. He nodded, barely. It was not approval. It was accounting. "Good use of assets," he said, perhaps to himself. Varen returned on a stretcher, white around the mouth and laughing small laughs that had nothing to do with humor. His leg ended in a shape that medical words would be applied to later. He caught my sleeve. "Held?" he asked. "Held," I said. "Good," he said. "Terrible habit, hard to quit." He looked at Mill and stopped laughing. He closed his eyes for a breath and opened them again with the practical brightness of a man who has learned a new fact and filed it. Orders blew down the trench like cold wind.
Organized withdrawal, the word said. Planned repositioning. The paper said we would fall back to a secondary line that had existed until someone remembered it did not. Hot relayed the message with a face that did not believe in synonyms. "We will step back," he said. "We will not run." The men prepared to run in a manner that would look like stepping back if you did not watch their feet too closely. We packed the gun for travel. I took the headset off and put it on again, and then left it on because my head had learned its weight. Lena moved along the line, handing out little white tablets and stern looks. She paused over Mill. She closed his eyes with 2 fingers that took longer than she meant. She tucked the blue ribbon into his collar as if retying a bandage. "Go," she told me, and her voice was a floor.
I took the tin icon from my pocket and touched the dent. Once, in the lower halls, I had watched a dent glow and then cease. This one was cool. I pressed it against my number, as if numbers and gods could agree on anything besides weight. The storm eased as if bored. The refinery breathed. The bells down the slope tried a few last notes and then tumbled into quiet. We stepped back in order, which is to say, we stepped back with our mouths shut and our eyes forward, and our hearts inventing reasons for each footfall that did not include fear. The word hold changed tense and walked behind us for a while, embarrassed to be seen in retreat. As we moved, Groot fell in beside me for a dozen paces. He did not look at me. "Your interference earlier," he said. "Yes," I said. "Do not repeat it," he said. "Yes," I said. A pause. "Your interference later," he said. "Yes," I said. "Repeat it when necessary," he said, and was gone up the line, hat cutting the stormlight into precise pieces. Behind us, the gun left a groove in the trench floor like a signature. Ahead, the secondary positions waited like furniture we had not yet learned how to sit in. We would teach ourselves quickly, or be taught. The Vox murmured congratulations and condolences in equal, meaningless measure. I tuned it to a channel that said nothing and let the silence ring. We marched past the place where Mill had once checked the top of my helmet like a child. I wanted to mark the spot. I did not. The bags near the infirmary rocked in a breeze that did not reach skin. I did not count them. I counted 10 breaths, then 10, then 10, until numbers built a bridge over a hole and let me walk. Organized withdrawal, the paper had said. We organized ourselves into the shape of men who withdraw and pretend it is strategy. The dust took our footprints and made them anonymous. Somewhere far behind, the machine gun cooled enough to feel offended. Somewhere farther, the artillery made new promises to new grids with the same old impatience. My number lay heavy against my chest, 733191. It had not changed. It would not, until stone, and stone was expensive. I thought of the clerk under a sunshade, the wax stamp, the thud like a small god making a small world. I thought of Mill's ribbon, blue in mud, and the way he had said after and meant it. The line would bend again. Maps love to curve. Men follow. The storm would remember us later when it needed a story to explain its own weather. We would step into the next place
like we had meant to be there all along. "Hold," the voices in the headset said. "Late. Too late. Forever. Hold."
Retreat is never orderly. The paper says organized withdrawal. The boots say mud, panic, curses swallowed because shouting marks you for artillery. We stepped into the drainage tunnels under Refinery 9, bent double, rifles banging on low ceilings, water up to our calves. The line that had once been ours dissolved behind us, chewed by bells and smoke. We counted heads, half. No one asked where the other half had gone. We knew the answer. The bags near the infirmary had always rocked in the wind. Now, the wind had more bags to play with. Varen lay on a stretcher, face pale, mouth tight. His leg was gone below the thigh, wrapped in layers of cloth that leaked dark spots anyway. He still tried to joke. "Lost a bet with the dirt," he muttered. "Dirt always cheats." His laugh cracked and then thinned to a hiss. We carried him because leaving him was unthinkable, and because leaving him would have been too easy. Commissar Hrot led with his hat straight, pistol low, voice level. "Volunteers," he said, and it was not a request. "Rear guard, last fire." A few stepped forward, some because they were brave, some because they didn't hear right, some because silence pressed them out of the line. I stepped because my number felt heavy on my chest, and because Mill's ribbon still clung damp in my pocket. Lena stepped too. She met my eyes once and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. We set charges in the side tunnels. The engineers had left us enough explosives to make a god cough. The plan was simple. Hold until the rest cleared, then bring the roof down and let the enemy eat stone. Simple plans are cruel because they leave no room for bargains. The first shapes came with the smell before them. Masks, bells, swords shining in the low light. The tunnel narrowed their numbers, but it narrowed ours too. The echoes doubled every sound, until each shot became a choir, each scream a hymn. We fired until barrels smoked, then fired more, because stopping was worse. Hrot stood tall, hat brushing the ceiling, pistol snapping precise lines of light. He looked like a statue that had decided movement was beneath it, but necessary. His silence cut sharper than his words. Lena crouched by the wounded, binding, cursing, burning cloth to sterilize. Her hands were still red, always red. A boy she tried to save clawed at her sleeve and whispered, "Mother." She shook her head and whispered back, "Not today." Then he went still, and she kept moving, because stopping would have broken her. The vox hissed in my ears, voices tangled. Some begged for artillery that would never come. Some laughed in madness. Some whispered numbers over and over, as if counting could plug holes in the world. I added my own voice, calling grids we did not need, because silence felt like treachery. The charges were ready. All that remained was timing. "Not yet," Hrot said, as if he owned the clock. Men fell around us, and he kept saying, "Not yet." A needle scraped my arm,
Shallow, just a kiss. Heat followed, a crawling wrongness. I pressed the wound to the wall, rubbed grime in, whispered Lina's rule. Ash, dirt, verse. No ash, no verse, only dirt. The crawl slowed. I counted breaths, 10, then 10, then 10, and it stayed away, for now. We shrank, step by step, until only a bend remained between us and the charges. Lina touched my shoulder. "Don't play hero," she said. "Someone has to hold the line." She smiled, tired. "Then I'll hold it too." The enemy pressed harder, a tide in a narrow pipe. Faces glowed wrong in the light, sores pulsing. Bells clanged off the stone until my teeth vibrated. I raised the Vox one last time. "Detonate," I said. My voice was calm, as if I were reporting rations. The answer crackled back, confirmed. We had seconds. Lina sat beside me, back against the wall. Her hand found mine, slick with blood and grime. "Don't let go," she whispered. "I won't." The first blast came from behind, the tunnel trembling like a throat gagging. Dust poured, rocks fell, screams became part of the collapse. Fire rolled through, quick and absolute. Lina's grip weakened. "Stay," she murmured. Her head fell against my shoulder. She was lighter than I expected, as if she had already given too much away. I was alone, the roof groaning above me, the air heavy with smoke. My number pressed cold against my chest. 73319. The only word left. I pulled a grenade from my belt, thumbed the pin. My hand was steady. I wrote one last letter in my head. "Sister, I carried your icon. The dent is still there. The flower still clings to my palms, even here. Tell the goats I tried. Tell the dirt I did not mean to leave. Tell anyone who listens that I counted until the end." The grenade hummed like the smallest of clocks. The ceiling sagged. Bells rang one last time, muffled by stone. When it went off, the world ended small and sharp. For a moment, the pressure lifted, and the silence was complete. Later, when they carved names into stone, those few who earned it, they misspelled mine. An error in a clerk's pen. The ledger remembered 73319. The stone forgot. And that was the only mercy I was given, to be erased by both.